So once again, I've got two GK3 printers in front of me, and no, this isn't deja vu. This time, neither of them is the GK3 Pro. These are both standard GK3 printers. But if you take a closer look, can you spot the difference? Go on, pause the video, drop it in the comments if you think you've cracked it already. We'll get to it soon enough, because now, finally, is the time to ditch the preview talk and bring you a proper review of the normal, basic, bog standard GK3. And sure, a lot of people have already shrugged these off, but buried in this machine is one surprisingly good reason you might actually want to pick this model or one of these models over any of its direct competitors. It's just a shame that that one feature kinda feels like a happy accident. Hi, this is Ross, and I'm FauxHammer Videos. Now, starting off with a bit of a somber retread, one of the biggest issues with the GK3 launch was the creation of two machines so incredibly similar, with the only difference being so nuanced it's more likely to confuse people than help them, the kind of thing that makes people go, you know what, that mess, and just pick a different brand to avoid the headache entirely. But to be fair to Uniformation, after the early preview videos dropped and the community started sharing some strong feedback, they did go back and make some changes. Other brands don't do that. So credit where it's due, it's genuinely refreshing to see a brand actually listening instead of just quietly waiting to move on to their next machine. That said, their fix about the two different machines, well, now having three kinda just makes the lineup even more confusing. Because yeah, now there are three GK3 printers. Okay, 4 if you count the Ultra. But the actual difference between these two standard models, well, one uses a ball screw and the other uses a lead screw, also known as a T-screw, which adds even more confusion to the pile, so let's try and straighten it out. So the original frustration was this. In the previews, I said if the ball screw is supposed to be the better motion system and it's only available on the Pro, then that means anyone who doesn't want the Pro's 385nm light source will be stuck with a potentially less desirable mechanical setup. So to me, the ideal solution would be offer the 405nm light source, the normal GK3 printer that most people want, with the ball screw option, so people can choose based on use case, not arbitrary part restrictions. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. In fact, kind of. Uniformation quietly upgraded the standard GK3 to also use a ball screw, and from what we saw in their Facebook group, all the early buyers got that version. Now things have shifted again. And apparently it's due to staffing limitations. Specifically, they just don't have enough technicians qualified to install the ball screw reliably. They had to scale back production of that version, which is why they're so commonly out of stock. So now they offer the cheaper T-screw variant alongside it, aimed at people who want the standard GK3 but just don't care too much about the motion hardware. Does that clear things up? Yeah, didn't think so. I'd also suggest they wouldn't have this problem if they just hadn't made the GK3 Pro, but that's another video, it's a different printer. Anyway, I'm going to cover the rest of the changes as we go through, and I mean changes from the preview. So let's start proper with the stuff you see on the outside, the kind of stuff that makes you go ooh before the printer inevitably disappoints you with firmware bugs and some confusing design choices that make no practical sense. Now, I've already said I don't love the look of it. The grey plastic against the green lid, it's not my cup of tea. I've warmed to it a bit, but still, yeah, I've seen better. The lift up and over lid is nice, and they've now added rubber seals down the side to help keep in VOCs. Or at least it would if there wasn't a few millimeters gap between the handle recess and the vat, a gap that could have been easily fixed with a simple extra piece of plastic. And this lid is also removable, so you can use it as a faceplate. The USB port on the front is recessed into the body of the machine to avoid resin drips, but one thing I missed, which Derek from J3D Tech pointed out recently, is that the port itself is recessed a bit too far into the plastic too, so if you use a USB stick with a thicker neck, it might not actually fit. Now thankfully the ones that come with it do fit, but for reasons I'll come on to later, they're not always the best ones to use. Round the back you've got the Wi-Fi antenna port and an Ethernet socket. Yay! And I am genuinely glad they included one. That alone makes this unit a far more appealing option for print farms than most. That's not the killer feature. Also on the rear is the power socket, but gone from the retail version is the old school rocker switch. That's now been moved to the front of the machine using the same style of power button as the GK2, which I've always been a fan of. I like a good click-clack. The only issue is that it's hidden underneath the rotatable screen plate. And as much as I like this rotatable plate because it means I don't need to crane my neck to look at the screen when I'm stood above it, yeah, I just don't know that this was a level of engineering we really needed in a 3D printer. But going back to the power socket, yeah, placement-wise, it's a bit daft. It's almost a thrown-in solution. Now, I like that they cared enough to move it to the front, because if it's around the back and you've got things up close to your printer, you can't reach it. But I can guarantee there will be people out there who'll get this machine and spend far too long trying to figure out how to turn it on. Now, probably not the people watching this video, obviously, you've just seen it, but I already know of a few users who've had this printer for over a week before realizing that this plate even rotates upwards. Now we'll move on to the guts of the thing, the bits that actually make it go brrr and sploosh, depending on how your print's going and how excited you are. First up, the build plate. I love this. I've always loved this. It's my favorite build plate of any printer. Yeah, it's chunky, but it's not as heavy as it looks. The surface has got a really nice soft grain texture. It's consistent across the whole thing. And once you've got it dialed in, adhesion is absolutely no issue. And there's even a little lip around the edge to catch minor resin spills, which is one of those simple, why doesn't everyone do this sort of details? And in my opinion, this has got the best leveling mechanism of any comparable printer. No auto leveling crap, no wobble, just a solid latch that clips the build plate directly onto the Z-arm. It locks in place, tight, clean, mechanical, it works. But again, this isn't the killer reason to buy one. Moving downwards, it's got a single linear rail setup like the GK2, and now depending on which version you end up with, you'll either get a T-screw or a ball screw. From what I've been told by people with actual engineering degrees, neither one is inherently better for accuracy at this scale. A bad ball screw can easily be worse than a good lead screw, but according to Uniformation, the reason they chose this as an option is just that the ball screw is designed to last longer, and that's it. Fair enough. Then there's the vat. It's big, it's plastic, it comes fitted with a crystal clear PFA film labelled as NFEP. And just for clarity, PFA stands for perfluoroalkoxy, and it's basically the stuff that replaced FEP, which is fluorinated ethylene propylene. NFEP is just a marketing term that means new FEP. And new FEP is PFA. So when you see NFEP or PFA, usually the same thing. The large vat is great for catching resin drips. The only real issue is that the resin feed system sticks out the back corner, and of course that's exactly where the pour spout is. So when it comes time to empty it, it's more awkward than I feel it needs to be. On the left side though, there is a really handy recess section where you can actually sit the build plate in sideways, and that lets you use the entire width of the vat as a drip tray, and I love this. More brands should implement it. But something I missed in my preview, and credit to James over at Rising 8 for spotting it, was that the lid wouldn't actually close properly on those machines if the plate was sitting in that slot. And Uniformation have since changed the design slightly. They've now extended the upper arm so you can close the lid, but it's a bit of a bodge job. You kind of have to wedge it shut. Now it works, but it's definitely more of a workaround than a fix. Also in the back left corner of the vat, there's a little metal pin which actually tells the auto refill system when it's time to top up the resin. And below the vat, we've got the LCD, and it comes with a plastic screen protector. It's not as optically clear as glass, so you will lose a bit of UV efficiency, but it's easier to replace, and that counts for something. Just tear it off, drop a new one on, and I had to do that after a resin leak, which I'll explain in my GK3 Pro video. Now then, the screen itself. This is what they call a 16K panel. It's not 16K, I've done plenty of videos explaining that. We'll just go with the resolution, which is 15,120 by 6,230 pixels. Uniformation do actually list the screen size honestly as 9.6 inches, which I've got to say I appreciate, because other brands like to pretend this is a 10-inch display when it's not. But this makes your build volume here 211 by 118 by 240 millimeters. And yeah, in my preview I did whinge about this screen being smaller than the GK2's 10.1 inch panel, but as it turns out, and thanks to Nico from Concepts 3D for this, the printer brands don't really have control over that. The screen manufacturers are the ones who are driving these changes. Smaller panels, smaller pixels, higher resolution, it's more marketing juice. And these new screens also limit UV penetration in the process. But the point is, it's not Uniformation's fault, as I might have implied before. That said, a lot of us in the community have noticed that the panels are kind of getting worse in the name of progress. Still, the end result is this is on par with other so-called 10-inch printers using the same 9.6-inch 16K screen, mostly thanks to the cob light source underneath. So print quality, yeah, it's on par with the best in its class, and I'll take that. But here's where it gets really interesting, to me at least, and weirdly and like I said, accidentally, this is the feature that might tip people over the edge. It's the stupidly easy to replace screen. Now seriously, that's not a joke. If you're weighing this up against something like a Saturn 4 or an M7, do yourself a favour, go and watch a screen replacement video for either of those printers, and I'll be right here when you get back. And if you've gone there and done that and watched them, yeah, thought so. Now I actually called Elegoo out for this directly in my Ultra 16K review, but I genuinely didn't realise that Anycubic were just as bad. And this process is before you get to the people saying that their printer was never quite the same again after the swap. So whilst this may seem like a tiny thing, and I did say in the intro this feels like an accidental win, it could genuinely be the reason why people pick this printer over its competitors, especially if you're planning to use it for longer than the lifespan of a single LCD. And when we consider these newer panels need stronger light sources just to push the UV through, yeah, they're burning out quicker as well. Now one last thing, underneath the screen is a heater that warms the lower chamber and allows heat to rise through the LCD into the resin. And yes, that can also affect the life of the screen. But, and the only counter I've got for this, is if we use the GK2 as an example, people weren't exactly complaining about those panels dying prematurely. And it's only 20 odd degrees. A lot of people in the world operate their hardware at 30 plus degrees. So genuinely, I'm not worried that this is going to make a massive impact to the screen life, but it is just a guess. Would I prefer a heated vat? Yeah, but this works. So a couple of extra features to mention. It's got a built-in fan, which pushes bad air through a magnetized carbon filter at the back and then recirculates it back into the chamber. Unfortunately, thanks to the gap in the lid, which you could tape shut, that same airflow will help push VOCs straight through the gap and into your room. But what I think is really cool is that Uniformation do provide a printable exhaust adapter on the USB stick, and in that case, that gap actually becomes a benefit because it sucks clean air in through the front and pushes the bad air out through the back. So, intentional feature or another happy accident? Who knows? Another feature is the resin feed. You can use Uniformation's new cuboid bottles to create a constant feed of resin into your vat during the print, and they even give you a free empty bottle with your printer so you can fill it with your own resin. And I like the idea of it, in theory. But since I've learned this is just another resin pump like any other resin pump, which means it's a pain in the arse to clean the lines out, and I have seen one too many people posting about how the lines cracked internally inside the machine, yeah, like any resin pump system, I personally will not use it. And yeah, that means I'm a bit gutted that we're paying for something, or at least I'm gutted that I would be paying for something that I, and I think many others, won't actually use. And finally, the webcam. It's a very good high-resolution camera, and thanks to the new app and cloud connection, we can finally remotely monitor prints visibly on this machine and generate time lapses. Hooray! Took them long enough. And I have to say, it is a shame that the light they put in this printer is mostly blocked by the bloody build plate that's between the light and the print. But at least in this final version, the light has a proper amber cover rather than just being a normal light covered in orange tape. Right then, the UI. This is super basic. It's not sexy, it's simple. It's pretty much exactly the same as the GK2, bar a few new options for the new features on the new printer. We can do a bit more now, like edit settings mid-print, which is helpful, but some of the features we expected by now still feel a bit half-baked. First disappointment for me, firmware updates. You see, there's a menu that looks like you can go into it and search for and apply over-the-air updates, but in the last 6 months I've never once seen anything appear there, and speaking to Uniformation, it turns out that over-the-air updates aren't actually a thing on this printer, nor will it ever be possible. But even when I inserted a USB drive with a firmware update on it, that menu still didn't see it. Instead, the way to run updates is you have to run two files, an RBF and a bin file, and you load them as if you're loading print jobs, which, yeah, it's kind of awkward, but for some yet unexplained reason, none of the 3 USB drives that I got from Uniformation would actually allow the firmware update to process. It was only when I tried a SanDisk USB stick that the update actually ran, and I've still got no idea why. These Uniformation drives worked absolutely fine transferring print files, just not the firmware update. So yeah, go figure. But I think the biggest letdown is their multi-exposure test. Yes, we got it, but it's so limited. You can't use your own test files like on other machines, you're locked into Uniformation's version of the test, and worst, you can't change any of the starting exposure times or increments. It starts at 1.8 seconds and then goes up in 0.2 second jumps, and that's it. And that means it's completely useless if, like me, you're running 30 micron layers. I know many of us are. So for most resins, 1.8 seconds is already far too high for that resolution. And for some resins, it's still too high at 50 microns. So right now, it's a less than half useful tool, and I can only hope they actually bother to revisit this later and actually give people the flexibility and functionality we need in order to make proper use of it. Because right now, this was a complete waste of development time, and the existence of it kind of makes Uniformation look worse than they are. So, conclusion time. All in all, what do I think about this printer? Can I just say ambivalent and leave it at that? No? Alright then. Honestly, I do still think this is a step down from its predecessor, but that's mostly because when the GK2 came out, the GK2 did everything the other printers did, but in smarter, more user-friendly ways, and it was the only one with a decent built-in heating system at the time. But now, other printers have caught up, and in some ways they've overtaken it in terms of tech. This machine's got no pressure sensing, for example, and no, that's not some oh my god wow feature, but it's still bloody handy. And yeah, as I said, I don't love paying for a resin pump, I prefer those to be optional, especially considering it's a feature that I'll never use. I think Uniformation needs to start looking at what consumers want and stop just trying to copy as much as they can from Formlab's approach. But whilst I can easily whinge, I also can't just sit here in my grumpy old man cave whinging that things were better in the GK2 day, because the only real reason I prefer that machine was the screen size. This still has everything that had, and more. And as I said, let's be honest, we can't blame Uniformation for that. The panel manufacturers are just giving everyone smaller screens now. This is what we get, so I'll begrudgingly accept it. And all in all, I think what it comes down to is when you look at this printer in the context of everything else out there and available right now, no, it's not the smartest. It doesn't have all the modern bells and whistles. I mean, it's got a time-lapse camera, and it does offer some convenience in that. The build plate is still brilliant. The way it mounts sideways as a drip tray, as half-arsed as that implementation now is, it's genuinely still useful. And it's also the only printer I've used with a phone app that does actually let you see your prints in progress, not just send you a text update saying layer 100 of 4000. That's great and all, but it's better when you can remotely see if a print has failed and remotely stop it. But above all, and this repetition is for those of you who skip to the end of the video to find out why you should buy this instead of a Saturn or M7, again, go and watch the screen replacement guides for either of those printers. That's why. Honestly, Uniformation should send a thank you letter to those other brands for making such a mess of their screen swap processors, because it's probably going to win Uniformation a lot of business. So now you've decided this is the printer you want, but which version do you begrudgingly go for, T-screw or ball screw? Well, if you want to save as much money as possible, go with the T-screw version. If you want it to last a bit longer, go with the ball screw version. But realistically, with how long the other components will last, or how soon you'll just want a new printer anyway because the tech got upgraded and you got bored, I'll bet neither one really matters for most of us in the long run. The GK2 had a T-screw and everyone was fine with that. In fact, people are still trying to buy them. So my honest advice, flip a coin. Don't let it decide for you, but that should tell you how your gut feels. Go with your gut. Or just get the one that's in stock. And you may have watched this thinking, maybe I want the GK3 Pro instead. I'm just going to say, You probably don't, but check out that video on my channel. I'll link it here when it goes live. If this video helped you decide on a printer, I'd really appreciate it if you did use the affiliate link in the description before you make a purchase. I will get a kickback at no extra cost to you, and that's what helps me keep making these videos. I want to give a massive thanks to all of our channel members. Your names are on screen now, and if you'd like to join them, you'll get your name up in lights, Discord roles, early access, and exclusive videos. Thank you all for watching. Until next time, for those who come after, FauxHammer out.